welcome. It's a very special situation. So I apologize in advance if my talk will be interrupted with some emotional dimensions. We are here, as we said, to mark 100 years of the first publication of the journal Maska, with the aim that in 100 years some other people could gather, maybe in this space or in another new venue that we even don't know that it exists. 100 years ago, this object did exist, but it had another purpose, very vital, in a different way as this venue has it today. To my opinion and to my great pleasure and also a great respect, this is one of my favorite venues in Ljubljana, in which Maska also left, I would say, quite some trace. So first of all, thank you, all of you, to come to this event. We will talk today a little bit about history of Maska, but also about event. You know who three of us we are. Alja, Lobnik and Brezavšek are editors of Maska journal. Janez, Janša, me, I am the director of Maska, who publishes the journal. And I would like to thank our hosts here from Bunker, who run this space with a lot of love, a lot of passion, and a lot of dedication to art, performance, culture, but also life. So thank you very much for hosting us here. It has been some time that we were not here, but making something, but we regularly come and enjoy what is happening here. Times are difficult, as we know, but that makes this respect even bigger, because today it's so difficult to organize something live, and especially if it's international. And what connects Maska and Bunker and many other organizations here is international profile. And in that respect, I'm also very, very thankful for all of you who traveled and to come to Ljubljana, that you did that effort and took, I hope, no risk, but you know, things are changing day by day. I would like also, next to our host, to thank people at Maska, apart from Alja and Pia, who are sitting next to me. There are other people who made this event possible and who are doing this with passion and dedication. Tina Dobnik, the production manager, Natasha Božić, who you probably met, who is next to the book stand, Urška Komino, who is taking care about PR, and Gregor Moder, who is the book editor, and Taja Lesjak-Šilak, who is preparing a new web page that I hope will be launched exactly 100 years after the publication of the first Maska, that is on the 1st of October. Also, I have to thank our financiers, the Ministry of Culture, municipality, and public book agency, plus several organizations that were also collaborating on making this event, and also archival work. That's at the first place Mrežni muzej Mesum with Ida Hirschenfelder. Thank you, Ida. The Slovenian Theatre Institute, who provided quite some archival material, as well as the Academy of Theatre, Film, Television and Radio, and also the Association for Amateur Culture in Slovenia, which was one of the publishers of Maska. Now, we were thinking to introduce the conference with trying to give a reason for this to happen. So I will start with a little bit of history of Maska, which maybe is not so known. And if it is, it's just good to remind a couple of historical points. And then we will also try to give perspective on what is that make us doing what we are doing today. So as mentioned, Maska, the journal, one of the cover is on your right side, the first poster. These posters are designed by Nika Lapkovsky, a young new graphic designer of the journal. And the journal was published in 1920 by Ljubljana section of Association of Actors in the Kingdom of Serbia, Croatia, and Slovenia. That was the name of the country back then. And I am bringing this because one of the features of Maska was that it has always been close, if not deeply embedded in artistic production of theater, dance, performance, etc. The first editor-in-chief was Rade Pregarc, who was himself theater director and broader cultural worker and activist. The journal was published in Slovene, but also in Serbo-Croatian, pointing out new cultural context after the First World War. And this is something that we found interesting also today when the journal is bilingual, and it's also by this bilinguality pointing to the context where it wants to be placed. Couple of curiosities. The journal was lasting for 1 year only. There were 10 issues published, and among collaborators there were Ljubomir Micic, later editor of famous avant-garde journal Zenit, published in Zagreb and Belgrade, and for example Josip Vidmar, who after the Second World War became kind of iconic cultural politician here in Slovenia. Back then very young, theater critic. And the drawings, the cover of all 10 Maskas had the same drawing. That's quite interesting. Made by famous modernist painter France Kral. Hello, Kazimir. Maska stopped publishing in 1921 and had a long hibernation in a way until 1985, when playwright and theater director, playwright Petar Božić, together with the theater director Tone Peršak, started publishing, editing new theater journal called Maske, which is Maska in plural. Since then, the journal is published continuously. Maybe you can ask, is this history then a little bit constructed? The answer is not a little bit, it's fully constructed, and you will see that through some other turning points that are happening after the year 1985. The journal in 1985 was at the beginning focused on some kind of advising of young makers how to do theater. Later, more and more critical discourse took part in the journal. And one of the cover is, again on your right-hand side, the blue cover number 3. Funny enough, also Maska, that started in 85, had, I think, 5 or 6 issues looking exactly the same. Just the color of the cover was a little bit different, like the one in the 20s. The relation towards the original Maska from the 20s was explicitly stated in the journal, restarted in 85. In 1990, an attempt to publish international theater or performance art journal, Euromaske, started. It was an initiative of playwright and theater director Dušan Jovanović, based here in Ljubljana, and Dragan Klajić, theater theoretician and historian, later director of Netherlands Theater Institute. They started with the idea to somehow create trans-European journal. It's the beginning of ITM, network of theater festivals and producers of new theater that went beyond national context and so on. And it was an amazing and I would say totally crazy attempt back then that maybe was published in wrong time. So only 3 issues were published. It was highly professional graphic product, glossy, full color, like amazing product in time in which Yugoslavia is about to fall apart, is encountering enormous inflation, and basically is entering slowly into what happened in the 90s. In 91, another big turning point happened. So the journal Maske was passed, the editing of journal was passed from Petar Božić and Tone Peršak to Irena Štaudohar and Maja Breznik. Irena Štaudohar and Maja Breznik are in 91 students of dramaturgy. It's a radical, really radical shift, and also a great gesture by 2 editors that I mentioned before. And Maja and Irena completely changed the profile of a journal. The black and white cover at the corner is the cover of the first issue that they published. Again, with clear reference to historical Maska, but also with the name. They changed name to the historical original name of the journal. They were practitioners involved also in making, and around in the editorial board, they gathered also many practitioners, directors, and dramaturgs who were contributing to Maska in the 90s. In 93, another important moment happened. Irena and Maya wanted to have bigger autonomy in publishing, editing journal, so they established the organization called Maska. It is a time in which many NGOs have been established due to the change of legal system after the declaration of independence of Slovenia. In 96, the first book was published. It was a result of further developing new discourse that was basically growing together with new performance practices in Slovenia, with this explosion of young and new performance makers, dance makers, interdisciplinary artworks, etc. So all this needed reflection, and the journal was just not enough. Yeah? The book program started in 96. Until today, we published 84 books. In 2000, another important initiative happened, and that is establishing of the Seminar for Contemporary Performing Arts, Maska's education platform, that has been run for years by Bojana Kunst. Thank you so much, Bojana, for what you were doing. It was, yeah, I have no words, sorry. Thank you. And in 2002, Maska started to be published bilingual, and it is since then the journal that is published in Slovenian and English. Since 2013, we have also a co-publisher, that's Intellect Books from Bristol, who is mainly distributing electronic version of the journal in the international context. So this is like a brief history, brief trajectory. You can see some of the covers here. You can also see a kiosk with a lot of journals displayed. All this has been beautifully designed by the artist who is with us in the back, Tony Soprano Meneglete. Thank you so much, Tony Soprano Meneglete, for this wonderful environment in which we are sitting today. Be it enough from my side for the moment, so Pia, please.
Hey, hello from my side. After we got this history clear, now we can, I will start to be a little bit more personal. So, I held my first Maska in my hands when I was still a teenager. I didn't understand much of what was written. Still, it offered a glimpse into what seemed to me a magical world of art and thought. Two things irresistibly attractive to me. Even the design was fascinating, resembling no other magazine or journal known to me. I remember the 100th issue, entitled Do It Yourself, that was almost blank, white, and with only short citings from every published issue until then in it. You can see some of the citations also here in the space. And this was for me really awesome, you know, because how can you pull that through? How can you get away with it? So how can you publish a blank issue? For me, this was something that indicated that everything is possible. So Maska was for me really special from when I first encountered with it. It was as if it was not just a random journal, it was a journal event. So Maska, for me, represented a sort of exceptional freedom, a heterotopia, space where people could pursue exactly what they wanted, no matter how niche it may seem. What is more, as I saw it in Maska, people could pursue their interests exactly how they wanted, under their own means. Later, I had the privilege to meet some of these exceptional people, and some of whom are today, some of you are today here with us. And this is really beautiful for me. Also, due to Maska's Seminar of Contemporary Performing Arts, I had this chance to meet many of you, and I also met some of friends that I think will last for life. So looking back, it is now 10 years from my own first publication in Maska, which happened actually quite quickly after I discovered Maska. Though publishing in it was a secret wish I thought could come true much later. But things, as you know, happen really quickly in such small context, in such small scenes. I don't know if this is luckily or unfortunately, but still here we are. So, strangely enough, I'm now co-editing Maska together with Alja. From my today's a bit less naive and more informed, more situated perspective. Of course, my youthful account of this freedom about and around Maska seems a little bit of a romanticism. But still, even though a production of a bilingual magazine in a physical form is really a tremendous amount of work, the conditions are ever so precarious, and due to many reasons, readership for theory is in a downfall. I think it's not the pressure of legacy, but the joy of trying to, with each issue, to create or recreate this initial freedom-ishness in these strange times that keeps me and keeps us going even today, for the 200th time. Of course, a lot changed during all these years. Editors, designers, focuses, performances, theories, artists, writers, approaches, formats, relations, politics, economy, the world. But Maska's consistency in fighting the division between theory and praxis was persistent throughout the years. Its focus was not only to fill in the formal educational gaps in the field of art, but I think also to create live contemporary theory that evolved together, or maybe even parallelly, as Bojana Cvejic's term is from also yesterday's presentation. So parallelly with contemporary art, and this theory was a production and dissemination of knowledge through different formats. Yesterday on the book's presentation, it was also said that performance practice is a form of thought. Theory, on the other hand, is not some omnipresent discourse that is a resource for when the practice is exhausted. It is rather, as Deleuze puts it, a relay from one practice to another, as is practice a relay from one theory to another. Both do not form a totality, but are partial and fragmentary. I think this intertwinement and mutual theory-practice learning and the awareness of the partiality of both was always a credo for Maska. For the writings in Maska were never meant to only present or reflect the current artistic production, but to think amidst the complexity of the topics that the practice knowingly or unknowingly tackled, to reflect its material conditions and ways of production, its interconnectedness and situatedness in the contemporary world. Maska was, and it still strives to be, an every-time journal event, a manifestation of its own, but not for its own. So we, the editing team, try to nurture that legacy also in our present mutual editing processes. Knowing that Maska's longevity is not a self-evident thing and that its existence is fragile, we all know that Frakcija or Teorija koja hoda had to shut down. So knowing all that, we are handling Maska with care.
Thank you, Pia. I will also continue personally, but having in mind genealogy of duo, of pair, of Pia and I. I will talk about precariousness, collectivity, group versus pair. Perhaps my part needs to reconsider why tackle the topic of self-management today. The issue is relevant to me at least on two levels, on individual and on institutional one. Self-government, as a historical fact, is an attempt that carries with it the idea that decision-making processes for the community would be conducted differently than through representative democracy, thus through self-organization processes. The idea always appears cyclically, and today we are putting it into consideration again, or we want to update it. I have to enter here personally. In our local memory, art history is predominantly present through two narratives, through the alternative in the 80s and the attempt to collectivize collective art, somehow everything condensed around NSK, and the Ljubljana Psychoanalytic School was formed in parallel. It was the groups in question that made a breakthrough in the local and international sense and placed Eastern art as well as theory as a relevant interlocutor with the West. 1990s brought a certain resistance against collectivization. Institutes were established and artists wanted to sign with a personal name, identify themselves, develop their own signatures, and create space for themselves. The premises were designed mainly as non-governmental organizations, which enabled the development of new production models and aesthetics that relatively dusty institutional theaters did not want or could not integrate. There was a certain moment that signed a generation of directors and artists who tried to break with their own history and at the same time turn mainly to the West, to the international space. A few years later, the magazine Maska became bilingual and thus tried to establish itself internationally. And of course, we must not forget about Euromaske, as Janša also said, the first serious attempt to internationalize magazine. Not to go too far from the topic, the 90s does in a way brought a certain enhancement of a new paradigm, where the individual author's gesture in relation to the history represented a certain rebellion. With Pia, co-editor of the Maska magazine, we work and live in a slightly different constellation. We are determined by other topics and other problems. Pia and I met on Radio Student. At that time, we were at the end of college training and mastering our writings through radio shows and critiques. And at the same time, there was a need for joint meetings, reading circles, lectures. It was a self-engagement. We created a theater circle, Pia Brezavšek, Robert Bobnič, Rok Bozovičar and I, and met every 2 weeks in the premises of Slogi Institute, where we read theoretical texts, also Bojana Cvejić, watched plays and talked about them. Our work has been quite lonely many times. Reading and writing are always signed with solitary and quiet work. Thus, we felt a strong need to find ways to create togetherness. For a while, we signed it as the SICK Collective. We tried to collectively write serious theoretical articles as well as critiques. We needed a certain common mental space where we could represent each other's support, safe space, care, as well as checking our own orientations in thought. We operated for a few years and then, for personal reasons, disbanded the collective. Pia and I decided to try a form of duality when the opportunity arose for editorial work at Maska magazine. Our duo is not the only one in the history of Maska. Tone Peršak and Peter Božič and Irena Štauduhar and Maja Breznik signed as duos as well. Irena and Maja, as Janša said, were still students of dramaturgy at the academy when they took over the editorial board. Pia and I at that time have had a precarious vulnerability and the signature of young critics even after we were no longer young. The young critic signature originated a few years ago, first in the literary and later in the theater scene. The label contained a trace of pejorativity and is a symptom of what I want to talk about. It was clear to the young critics that they did not meet the standards of good older male critics, the sharpness of thought and language of decision makers who valued production from a relatively well-placed position, had time to educate, read and watch. Due to the lack of space for criticism and culture in the media, the number of publications is of course lower, fees are reduced, and this field is occupied by precarious workers. The field is sexually marked by female critics, which probably associated with a decline in the reputation of critics and with the economic impoverishment that is inclined with the structural changes that criticism has undergone in recent years. The space for education is also shrinking. Maska seminar is therefore even more important now in that moment in time. Rehabilitation of criticism, however, is tackled at different ends at the same time, as is typical of the relatively resilient non-institutional scene. We always somehow respond to the needs and demands of a time. Via Negativa is, for example, the producer who created the online platform Neodvisni, which we also co-edit with Pia and has now become an integral part of Maska's content. So the producers themselves are the ones who organize the existence of the critique. Those who produce the performances are also the ones who take care of its reflection and archiving, which of course entails us in a certain incestuous conditions, but the scene is so small that it's difficult to talk about it without friendly cooperation relations. In this way, we take care of maintaining and expanding the pool of writers, and many times the format is more relaxed, more experimentational. Rules are not so rigid as, for example, in newspaper landscape. For a long time, Pia and I only existed as a precarious edge, because the non-institutional theater scene after the 90s and the fragmentation of the territory narrowed the entrance to more stable places from which it is possible to survive. Today, entering the independent scene is probably more difficult than the institutional one. The field is impassable, led by alliances and proximities. With the disintegration of Yugoslavia, the initial fascination with the West brought disappointment and confinement to relatively suffocating national context. The space has shrunk to local context that is rarely aired, which is evident both at the level of thought and at the level of art production. Our building of knowledge was not accustomed to ventilating with other contexts. The common Yugoslav space disintegrated. We reached for it only through nostalgia, while we, at least not our generation, did not open ourselves to Western context. We cultivated nonchalant attitude towards them, for they were too dull and just, almost moralistic, to strike us. Pia and I found ourselves in such a constellation of things. In front of a closed independent scene, unsure of our knowledge and not very well equipped to enter the scene. But we had each other, and that still puts us through various embarrassments many times today. Our duo is not a classic collective as we are used to from the 80s. The duality probably requires a certain intimate space between us, which is seen between friendship and professionalism. We offer each other emotional support, switching between tasks and confessions. We negotiate things, and we are resolving disputes smoothly so far. With duration, we get to know each other better and become tolerant of things that get on our nerves. Not that we don't see them, we just live them. Our bond has a certain tendency towards protection and territoriality, and a time that is inscribed in our relationship only strengthens this binary collective for the time being. It is a survival strategy and at the same time a privilege in a time of particularism, individualism, and fragmentation in which we live. It is a gesture of solidarity as we have divided the work of one into two employments. The binary composition is probably also more resilient nowadays than the collective body. It is somehow more flexible, but still decisions are not made in the silence of one's head. Work is accumulating, so we have to divide it more and more, leaving ourselves autonomy for certain fields, where one or the other cultivates greater affinities. By doing so, we also create pockets of freedom that are not regulated by negotiation, but allow us for some independent agency. A binary collective is probably more like a partnership or friendship than a collective. So for me, the question remains, is a binary collective a collective, and is there a room for a third element? And how this intervention could bring changes in dynamics and relationship? We will let you know.
Thank you, both of you. We will close this introduction by pointing to the conference itself, and we just wanted to say why we designed it and invited people who are going to talk after us. The reason is very simple. All the contributors are coming from ex-Yugoslavia, from the territory of ex-Yugoslavia. They are not belonging to one generation, but what makes them connected is not only Maska, but the fact that they moved. Except two of them who are, or three, who still live in the countries that came after disintegration of Yugoslavia. Most of the contributors live on the West, and they got full professional affirmation there, being professors and curators and cultural workers in general in new contexts. This didn't happen by chance. The level of reflection and level of theory and research that has been generated in this area is special, I would say. It's highest possible level, and we can be really happy that we have world top researchers and theoreticians in the field sitting with us today, and they will talk to us. I would like to maybe clarify why this decision. There was some strong criticism towards this direction towards the West by especially independent cultural scene in Slovenia, including artists, theoreticians, but also producers towards the West. Yeah? And the criticism is based on the fact that actually we were doing the same as nationalist politics in Slovenia, being it of liberal or conservative background. So the Slovenia wanted to leave Yugoslav context and Balkan territory as soon as possible. And the work of artists and cultural field is seen also through that perspective as being an instrument in the hands of nationalist politics and political shift. Yeah. This is something that needs to be discussed, I think, more extensively, yeah? Because, of course, all of us who were working in that period of time would have a lot to answer to this kind of statement. Nevertheless, I would not refuse it as irrelevant. The other thing is, maybe another turning point happened in international context in year 2005. There was a gathering, a conference, a festival called Inventory in Vienna's Tanzquartier, where a lot of makers and dramaturgs and theoreticians and researchers from all over the Europe mainly gathered in order to reflect new movements in dance choreography and performance from the fall of Berlin Wall onward. And simply to say, it turned out that the only ones who had to say something relevant were coming from ex-EU. It was a big surprise, not only for people who were coming from the territory of ex-Yugoslavia, but even more for hosts and entire Western context. I think from that point on, the doors for discourse that has been developed here were widely open. I would just say that what Pia mentioned earlier, that if there is a mission that Maska is standing behind, it is certainly to be against of this division of theory and reflection, or theory and artistic making, because we see both of the fields as a practice. And it's theoretic theory, making theory is a practice, and the same as it is making art, producing it, and so on. And we see reflection as something that is needed. It's something that is integrated in the way how art is also produced these days. So there is no nostalgia here. There is deep interest in the work of all of you who are going to talk, and there is no attempt to create any other ties, because these ties have been established long time ago, and they don't have any kind of political agenda that would be related to real politics. But it is our real politics to meet and share and discuss and create with people who approach and work in this field with the passion, curiosity, and liveness and vitality that brings discourse over the edge of already existing. I've been in constant discussion with Pia and Alja. Okay, but why are you interested in the territory of former Yugoslavia, not living basically in that time, or not living your major part of your life in that time? So, can you answer it now?
Okay, yes, it's true that we were actually too young to even have a concept of a country when Yugoslavia so dissolved. But I think that we have an interest in this connecting again of this creating this kind of affinities again, maybe. It's another context, of course, but I think that maybe to connect with the ex-Yugoslavian space, maybe the broader Eastern Europe space, or maybe even the global South, is something that has a potential. We see it really as an interesting place. These are interesting places, or for us they are more interesting than maybe what the Western globalized and unified world has become. So maybe our interest lies here, and I would just say this, that I'm really glad that you all came, and for me, I really respect the work of all of you that came today for tomorrow, of course, because I think that what you have, I think, is really this affiliation, this alliance. I mean, by you, I mean maybe the ex-Yugoslavian theoreticians that went to work abroad. You really have this, I think you have this special power, and I think this is because of that, it's because you, I think, exactly because you're not from the central position. You have this minoritarian, as Deleuze would say, position, and you can see the West differently than the West sees itself. So I think this really is something very special, and I hope we will have opportunities to maybe to net some of the similar affiliations that you have managed. So thank you again all for coming. I'm really looking forward of each panel that is happening in these 2 days, and maybe the fact that you came, your presence here is a guiding light to our uncertain future, but I wish for it to be long and at least free-ish. So thank you very much again.
Thank you, Pia. And just before we start with the first panel, I would just like to point a couple of couple of remarks related to the event that are not part of the conference. We are just joined by the Blaž Peršin, director of the City Museum and Galleries of Ljubljana, long-term collaborator. We did together an amazing event, Shocking Gala Show, some years ago. Blaž, thank you for collaboration also in this event that is taking part in the context of Indigo Festival produced by your house. So next to the conference, we will have a debate tomorrow at 4 o'clock with the former and current editors of Maska. So everything that was more taxatively listed earlier will be discussed, moderated by Aldo Milohnic, also present with us, long-term collaborator, an amazing and important cultural worker based here in Ljubljana. Yesterday you had the chance, some of you, to see the newest production by Maska, Parquet Ball, work choreographed and made by Matea Bučar. A little detail, that work was originally imagined in 2006 when number 100 of Maska was published. Number 100, as Pia mentioned, was void or full of quotes, but it had its manifestation in the Museum of Modern Art, where artists about whom we wrote at Maska, we invited them to imagine their artwork they would produce in 2023 when number 200 of Maska was supposed to be published. In the meantime, time ran faster, so number 200 has been published, the first of the three. This year there will be number 200AA, 200BB, and 200CC. 200CC will have proceedings and papers that will come after the conference. And Parquet Ball is the first work. We are very proud, and we hope in next 3 years we will produce major part of the works that has been designed, imagined 14 years ago. There is still a working web page where you can see the list. I think some of the artists are even here present today who made a vision of a project in 17 years. Tonight and tomorrow we are showing this year production game directed by Žiga Divjak, emerging but already acclaimed a young theater director. It is the documentary theater piece about pushbacks of refugees on the borders between Croatia and Slovenia and Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia. So please join us at these events. Parquet Ball is also running tonight and tomorrow. For our guests, we will also have internal event. So it's not a public event, but just for the guests. We will have also a little presentation of the new post office. It is a venue that Maska curates together with Mladinsko Theater. We also co-produced as a part of that program the performance game. So I think that's enough from our side. We are so excited to leave this space to Bojana Kunst, Bojana Cvejić, and Katja Čičigoj, who will moderate the panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.